The cafe was alive with the hum of laughter and clinking cups, but to Lila, it was a world wrapped in silence. She sat near the window, her hands wrapped tightly around a steaming cup of cappuccino. The soft golden light from the setting sun spilled across her table, glinting off the silver bracelet she nervously turned round and round on her wrist. Today wasn't just any day. It was her first date in over a year, a blind date she'd agreed to after weeks of hesitation. Her best friend had convinced her, saying, "You deserve love too, Lila. Don't let your deafness stop you." She had spent hours getting ready, curling her long hair and putting on a pale blue dress that matched her eyes. Every detail was perfect, yet her stomach churned with worry. Would he mind that she couldn't hear? Would he be patient enough to try? Lila believed kindness could bridge any gap, but deep inside, she also knew not everyone saw the world that way. The bell over the cafe door jingled. She looked up instantly, heart racing, and saw him, Ryan. He was taller than she expected, with sharp features and a confident stride. He scanned the room, spotted her, and walked over. She stood, smiling warmly, and signed a gentle hello, then gestured for him to sit. Ryan smiled awkwardly, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. Lila quickly pulled out her phone and typed, "Hi, I'm Lila. So nice to finally meet you." She turned the screen toward him, hopeful. Ryan read it and nodded stiffly, replying out loud, "Hey. Yeah, you look nice." She couldn't hear the words but read his lips, returning a shy smile. She typed again, "Thank you. How was your day?" He squinted, tapping the table impatiently. "So, you can't talk. Or you just don't want to?" he asked. His voice carried enough for people at nearby tables to glance over. Lila froze, then shook her head lightly and typed back, "I can talk a little, but it's easier for me to sign or write." Ryan exhaled, visibly uncomfortable. "You didn't say that in your profile," he muttered. His tone wasn't cruel, but the lack of empathy in his eyes felt colder than any insult. Lila's throat tightened. She tried to smile, to explain that communication could still be easy between them, but he was already shaking his head. "I just don't think I can do this," he said, standing abruptly. "I'm sorry, but this isn't what I expected." He grabbed his jacket, avoiding her eyes as he turned toward the door. The cafe fell into an awkward hush. Lila's hands trembled. She wanted to call him back, to tell him she wasn't broken, just different. But no words came. She sat there, blinking hard, as tears blurred her vision. The world around her seemed to move in slow motion, couples chatting, spoons stirring, a barista laughing at something someone said, 1,000 sounds she couldn't hear, 1,000 connections she couldn't be part of. She felt invisible. Then, from across the room, a little boy's curious gaze found her. He tugged on his father's sleeve and pointed softly. The man turned, watching as Lila brushed away a tear. He had kind eyes, tired but gentle, the kind that noticed pain without being told. The boy whispered something, and the father signed back, "She's sad." The boy nodded, his small hands mimicking the same sign clumsily. Lila didn't see it. She stared at her reflection in the window instead, forcing herself to breathe. She told herself it didn't matter, that she'd been through worse. But deep down, a quiet ache spread through her chest, the ache of being misunderstood, of being left behind for something she never chose. Outside, Ryan disappeared into the night. Inside, Lila sat alone, unaware that just a few feet away, someone who spoke her language, her true language, had already noticed her pain and was about to change her life forever. Lila sat frozen for several minutes after Ryan left, staring at the empty chair across from her as if it still held his shadow. The laughter and chatter around her felt distant, almost unreal, a world she could see but not touch. She tried to steady her breathing, tracing her finger along the rim of her cup until the steam disappeared. Her chest felt tight, her eyes heavy. The rejection wasn't new, but it still cut deep every time it came. She told herself to get up, to leave before the tears came again, but her legs didn't move. As she reached for her purse, someone gently tapped her shoulder. She turned, startled, and saw a man standing beside her table. He looked to be in his early 30s, with warm brown eyes and a kind face framed by a bit of scruffy beard. Beside him stood a small boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old, clutching a toy car in one hand. The man smiled softly and raised his hands, then began to sign. "Are you okay?" Lila blinked, disbelief flooding her face. It took her a second to respond. Someone was signing. Slowly, carefully, she lifted her hands and replied, "I'm fine, thank you." Her signs trembled slightly from surprise. He nodded, his expression gentle. "I saw what happened," he signed. "That man was wrong. You deserve better." For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The words hit harder than she expected, not because they were dramatic, but because they were kind. Honest. The kind she rarely heard anymore. She shook her head quickly, embarrassed, trying to brush it off. "It's okay. People just don't understand," she signed back. He smiled, a little sadly. "That doesn't make it okay." The little boy tugged on his sleeve and signed clumsily, "She's pretty." The man laughed quietly and translated, "This is my son, Noah. He's learning to sign too. We practice together every day." Lila smiled for the first time that night. She bent slightly toward Noah and signed, "Nice to meet you, Noah." The boy grinned, shy but proud, repeating the signs back to her with enthusiasm. Ethan pulled out a chair across from her, motioning as if to ask permission. Lila nodded. He sat down, the boy climbing into the seat beside him, setting his toy car on the table like a tiny centerpiece. The waiter approached, asking something Lila couldn't hear. She looked helplessly at the menu, but Ethan intervened smoothly, ordering for all of them and pointing toward a plate of cheesecake in the glass display. He turned back to her and signed, "You look like you could use something sweet." Her eyes softened. "You didn't have to," she signed, but he shook his head. "It's no trouble. I think kindness should be contagious." For a long moment, silence settled between them, not awkward, but warm. The kind of silence that felt shared, not lonely. Lila studied his hands, the confident but gentle movements of his fingers. He wasn't just fluent, he was thoughtful, every sign shaped with care. She finally asked, "Where did you learn to sign?" His smile faltered for a moment, then returned. "My wife was deaf," he signed slowly. "She passed away 2 years ago. My son and I still sign because it's how we feel close to her." Lila's heart tightened. She signed softly, "I'm sorry." "Don't be," he replied. "I think she'd like that I met you tonight." Before she could respond, Noah slid the cheesecake toward her with both hands, grinning. She laughed, tears pricking her eyes again, but this time, they weren't from sadness. She picked up a fork and offered a bite to Noah, who giggled and nodded eagerly. Ethan watched them, smiling. "See, you're already his favorite person." For the first time in a long time, Lila didn't feel like the odd one out in the room. She didn't feel broken, or strange, or less than anyone else. Sitting there with Ethan and Noah, she felt something she hadn't in years, seen, understood, and quietly safe. Outside, the city lights flickered to life as night settled in. Inside, 3 people shared a slice of cheesecake and a silent language that somehow said everything words never could. Days turned into weeks, and what began as a chance meeting became a quiet rhythm that Lila found herself looking forward to. Every few evenings, she returned to that same cafe, not for a date, not to chase what she'd lost, but because it had become a place where she felt understood. Ethan and Noah would already be there most times, waving as she walked in. Noah would run ahead, holding up his toy car or a drawing he made, eager to show her everything. Lila would kneel down, smiling, and listen with her eyes as he signed clumsily about his day. Ethan would watch them from the table, his expression soft and content, like a man watching sunlight through a window. They began to talk more, with their hands, with their eyes, and sometimes through written words when emotions grew too heavy to sign. Ethan told her about his wife, Maya, how she'd taught him sign language when they first met. How she used to tease him for moving his hands too stiffly. He smiled when he talked about her, but there was always a flicker of pain behind the warmth. Lila understood that feeling, the ache of carrying a love that had nowhere to go anymore. One afternoon, they met at the park instead of the cafe. It was early spring, sunlight shimmered through the trees, and laughter of children filled the air. Lila sat on the grass beside Noah as he played with his toy cars in the dirt. Ethan spread a small picnic blanket and handed her a cup of tea. She thanked him, her hands brushing his for a second, a small touch, but enough to make her heartbeat quicken. They signed slowly, comfortably. Noah really likes you, he said, smiling. Lila grinned, glancing at the boy who was busy creating a racetrack with sticks. He's amazing. You're a wonderful father. Ethan shook his head modestly. I'm just trying to be both parents for him. It's not easy. Lila paused, then signed softly, you're doing better than most. He looked at her for a moment, then nodded. You're kind. She hesitated before replying, kindness is what I needed once. So now I give it. The words lingered between them, heavy with meaning. Ethan reached for his thermos, but his hand stopped halfway. You know, he signed, when I saw you that night at the cafe, something about you reminded me of her. Not your face, not your voice. Just your strength. Lila blinked, her chest tightening. I didn't feel strong that night, she signed back. Maybe not, but strength isn't loud, it's just surviving when no one notices. For a moment, neither of them moved. The breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of spring flowers. Lila smiled faintly, blinking away tears that had formed without her realizing. She looked down at her hands and whispered a single word, one Ethan couldn't hear, but understood through the tremble of her lips, thank you. From that day, their friendship deepened. They met for walks, shared quiet dinners, and taught Noah new signs together. Sometimes they laughed until their faces hurt. Other times, they sat in silence, just watching the world move around them. It didn't matter. Silence between them wasn't empty anymore, it was full of meaning. One evening, rain began to fall while they were walking back to their cars. They took shelter under a small awning. Lila's hair clung to her cheeks, her dress damp from the drizzle. Ethan pulled off his jacket and placed it over her shoulders. She tried to protest, but he shook his head. He signed, I lost someone who made my world quiet. And then I met someone who made silence beautiful again. Lila felt her throat tighten. Her hands trembled slightly as she replied, you make me feel seen. He smiled, a slow, honest smile that reached his eyes. He didn't move closer, didn't rush it. He just stood there beside her in the rain, both of them watching the drops roll down from the awning, feeling something wordless but real forming between them. When the rain stopped, he reached for her hand, not to hold it tightly, but to let her know he was there. She didn't pull away, she simply smiled, fingers curling lightly around his. And for the first time in a very long while, Lila didn't feel like life was something she had to survive. She felt like it was something she could finally live. The cafe glowed that evening like a memory reborn. The same golden lights, the same aroma of roasted coffee beans, the same corner table where everything had once gone wrong. But tonight, it felt different, warmer, softer, filled with a quiet joy that hummed through the air like invisible music. Lila stood outside for a moment before walking in, taking a deep breath. Her reflection in the window smiled back at her, stronger and more certain than the girl who had once cried there months ago. Inside, Ethan and Noah were already waiting. The little boy spotted her first, jumping up excitedly, waving his hands to sign, Lila. She laughed and crouched to hug him. His hair smelled faintly of soap and cinnamon, and when she pulled back, she noticed a small envelope clutched in his hand. What's that? She signed playfully. Noah grinned and hid it behind his back. Secret. Ethan chuckled, rising from his seat as she approached. He looked different too. The tiredness that once shadowed his eyes had softened into calm. You look beautiful, he signed, his hands steady and sure. You always say that, she teased. Because it's always true. They sat together, the three of them, as they always did, sharing dessert, laughing silently, Noah telling stories in half signs and half gestures that only they could fully understand. To anyone else, it might have looked like chaos, hands flying, faces animated, but to them, it was a language of love. After a while, Noah climbed into his father's lap and handed Lila the small envelope. Now, he mouthed eagerly. Ethan nodded. Lila tilted her head, curious, and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a folded piece of paper covered in Noah's childish handwriting. She unfolded it and read, Mom said love sounds like laughter. But I think it looks like you. Her eyes blurred instantly. She looked up, and Ethan was already watching her, his hands trembling slightly as he began to sign. You walked into that cafe heartbroken. I saw someone strong but hiding it. You've changed my world. Lila, not because you filled silence with words, but because you made it beautiful again. Her lips parted in shock as he stood, coming around to kneel beside her chair. People in the cafe began to turn, sensing something important unfolding. Lila's heart pounded, tears spilling down her cheeks. Ethan signed again, slower this time, every movement deliberate and full of meaning. Noah and I have been waiting for a long time to find someone who understands us, who understands love without needing to hear it. You are that person. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a delicate silver ring, simple but shining. Would you let us be your family? He signed. Lila's hands covered her mouth as a sob escaped her, a soundless cry, trembling through her whole body. Noah clapped his hands excitedly, mouthing, "Say yes." Through her tears, she nodded and signed back, her hands shaking. Yes. 1,000 times, yes. The cafe erupted in applause. The barista behind the counter cheered, a couple near the door whistled, and Noah squealed with joy, hugging both of them at once. Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, then pressed his forehead against hers, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. For a moment, everything around them disappeared, the noise, the people, the lights. There was only the warmth of his hands, the weight of the ring, and the rhythm of hearts that didn't need sound to beat in sync. Ethan signed one last time, "I love you." Lila smiled through her tears and replied, her fingers trembling but certain. "I hear you." Noah wrapped his arms around them both, giggling. The three of them stood there, a new family formed not by chance, but by compassion, by loss, and by the beautiful silence that had brought them together. Outside, the night sparkled with city lights. Inside, the cafe where her heart once broke now echoed with something deeper than sound, the unspoken promise that sometimes, love doesn't need words to be heard.